Chapter 7. It was just after reveille the next morning, and we were rummaging around in our nose bags for the last of our oats, when I saw Captain Jamie Stewart riding along the horse lines towards us. Behind him, swamped in a vast great coat and a peaked cap, trailed a young trooper I had never seen before. He was pink-faced and young under his hat, and reminded me at once of Albert. I sensed that he was nervous of me, for his approach was hesitant and reluctant. Captain Stewart felt Topthorne's ears and stroked his soft muzzle, as he always did the first thing in the morning, and then, reaching across, he patted me gently on the neck. "Well, Trooper Warren, here he is," said Captain Stewart. "Come closer, Trooper. He won't bite. This is Joey. This horse belonged to the best friend I ever had, so you look after him, do you hear?" His tone was firm, but not unsympathetic. "And, Trooper, I shall be able to keep my eye on you all the time, because these two horses are inseparable. They are the best two horses in the squadron, and they know it." He stepped closer to me and lifted my forelock clear of my face. "Joey," he whispered, "you take care of him. He's only a little lad, and he's had a rough ride in this war so far." So when the squadron moved out of the wood that morning, I found I could no longer walk alongside Topthorne as I had before with Captain Nichols, but was now just one of the troop following behind the officers in a long column of troopers. But whenever we stopped to feed or drink, Trooper Warren was careful to walk me over to where Topthorne stood, so that we could be together. Trooper Warren was not a good horseman. I could tell that the minute he mounted me. He was always tense and rode me heavy in the saddle like a sack of potatoes. He had neither the experience and confidence of Corporal Samuel Perkins, nor the finesse and sensitivity of Captain Nichols. He rocked unevenly in the saddle and rode me always on too tight a rein, so that I was forced to toss my head continuously to loosen it. But once out of the saddle, he was the gentlest of men. He was meticulous and kind in his grooming, and attended at once to my frequent and painful saddle sores, chafings and windgalls, to which I was particularly prone. He cared for me as no one had since I left home. Over the next few months, it was his loving attention that was to keep me alive. There were a few minor skirmishes during that first autumn of the war, but as Captain Nichols had predicted, we were used less and less as cavalry and more as transport for mounted infantry. Whenever we came across the enemy, the squadron would dismount, drawing their rifles from their buckets, and the horses would be left behind out of sight under the care of a few troopers, so that we never saw any action ourselves, but heard the distant crackle of rifle fire and the rattle of machine guns. When the troop returned and the squadron moved off again, there were always one or two horses without riders. We would be on the march for hours and days on end, it seemed. Then suddenly a motorcycle would roar past us through the dust, and there would be the barked commands and the shrill call of the bugles, and the squadron would swing off the road and into action once more. It was during these long, stifling marches, and during the cold nights that followed, that Trooper Warren began to talk to me. He told me how in the same action in which Captain Nichols had been killed, he had had his horse shot down from beneath him, and how only a few weeks before he had been an apprentice blacksmith with his father. Then the war had broken out. He did not want to join up, he said, but the squire of the village had spoken to his father, and his father, who rented his house and his smithy from the squire, had no option but to send him off to war. And since he had grown up around horses, he volunteered to join the cavalry. "I tell you, Joey," he said one evening, as he was picking out my hoofs, "I tell you, I never thought I would get on a horse again after that first battle. Strange thing is, Joey, that it wasn't the shooting. Somehow I didn't mind that. It was just the idea of riding a horse again that terrified the life out of me. Wouldn't think that possible, would you? Not with me being a smithy and all. Still, I'm over it now, and you've done that for me, Joey. Given me back my confidence. I feel I can do anything now. I feel like one of those knights in armour when I'm up on you." Then, with the onset of winter, the rain came down in sheets. It was refreshing at first and a welcome break from the dust and the flies, but soon the fields and paths turned to mud beneath us. The squadron could no longer bivouac in the dry, for there was little enough shelter, and so both man and horse were constantly soaked to the skin. There was little or no protection from the driving rain, and at night we stood now over our fetlocks in cold, oozing mud. But Trooper Warren looked after me with great devotion, finding shelter for me wherever and whenever he could, rubbing some warmth into me with wisps of dry straw whenever he could find it, and ensuring that I always got a good ration of oats in my nosebag to keep me going. As the weeks passed, his pride in my strength and stamina became obvious to everyone, as did my affection for him. If only, I thought, if only he could just groom me and care for me, and someone else could ride me. My Trooper Warren would talk a great deal about how the war was going. We were, he said, to be withdrawn to reserve camps behind our own lines. The armies, it appeared, had pounded each other to a standstill in the mud and had dug in. The dugouts had soon become trenches, and the trenches had joined each other, zigzagging across the country from the sea to Switzerland. In the spring, he said, we would be needed again to break the deadlock. The cavalry could go where the infantry could not, and were fast enough to overrun the trenches. We'd show the infantry how to do it, he said. But there was the winter to survive, before the ground became hard enough again for the cavalry to be used effectively. Topthorne and I spent that winter sheltering each other as best we could from the snow and the sleet, whilst only a few miles away we could hear the guns pounding each other day and night incessantly. We saw the cheery soldiers smiling under their tin hats as they marched off to the front line, whistling and singing and joking as they went, and we watched the remnants struggling back, haggard and silent under their dripping capes in the rain. Every once in a while Trooper Warren would receive a letter from home, and he would read it out to me in a guarded whisper, in case anyone should overhear. The letters were all from his mother, and they all said much the same thing. "My dear Charlie," he would read, "your father hopes you are well, and so do I. We missed having you with us at Christmas. The table in the kitchen seemed empty without you. But your little brother helps when he can with the work, and father says he's coming on well, even though he's still a bit little, and not strong enough yet to hold the farm horses. Minnie Whittle, that old widow from Hannaford Farm, died in her sleep last week. She was 80, so she can't grumble at that, though I expect she would if she could. She was always the world's worst grumbler. Do you remember? Well, son, that's about all our news. Your Sally from the village sends her best and says to tell you that she'll be writing soon. Keep safe, dearest boy, and come home soon. Your loving mother." But Sally won't write, Joey, because she can't. Well, not very well anyway. But just as soon as this lot's over and finished with, I'll get back home and marry her. I've grown up with her, Joey, known her all my life. Suppose I know her almost as well as I know myself, but I like her a lot better. Trooper Warren broke the terrible monotony of that winter. He lifted my spirits, and I could see that Topthorne too welcomed every visit he made to the horse lines. He never knew how much good he did us. During that awful winter, so many of the horses went off to the veterinary hospital and never came back. Like all army horses, we were clipped out like hunters, so that all our lower quarters were exposed to the mud and rain. The weaker ones amongst us suffered first, for they had little resilience and went downhill fast. But Topthorne and I came through to the spring, Topthorne surviving a severe cough that shook his whole massive frame as if it was trying to tear the life out of him from the inside. It was Captain Stewart who saved him, feeding him up with hot mash and covering him as best he could in the bleakest weather. And then, one ice-cold night in early spring, with frost lying on our backs, the troopers came to the horse lines unexpectedly early. It was before dawn. There had been a night of incessant heavy barrage. There was a new bustle and excitement in the camp. This was not one of the routine exercises we had come to expect. The troopers came along the horse lines in full service order. 2 bandoliers, respiratory haversack, rifle and sword. We were saddled up and moved silently out of the camp and onto the road. The troopers talked of the battle ahead, and all the frustrations and irritations of imposed idleness vanished as they sang in the saddle. And my Trooper Warren was singing along with them, as lustily as any of them. In the cold grey of the night, the squadron joined the regiment in the remnants of a little ruined village peopled only by cats, and waited there for an hour until the pale light of dawn crept over the horizon. Still the guns bellowed out their fury, and the ground shook beneath us. We passed the field hospitals and the light guns before trotting over the support trenches to catch our first sight of the battlefield. Desolation and destruction were everywhere. Not a building was left intact. Not a blade of grass grew in the torn and ravaged soil. The singing around me stopped, and we moved on in ominous silence and out over the trenches that were crammed with men, their bayonets fixed to their rifles. They gave us a sporadic cheer as we clattered over the boards and out into the wilderness of no man's land, into a wilderness of wire and shell holes and the terrible litter of war. Suddenly, the guns stopped firing overhead. We were through the wire. The squadron fanned out in a wide, uneven echelon, and the bugle sounded. I felt the spurs biting into my sides and moved up alongside Topthorne as we broke into a trot. "Do me proud, Joey," said Trooper Warren, drawing his sword. "Do me proud."